do I do? We are adjust to.
Look at
Short or
you like this or should this?
do you want to look in the camera?
Okay.
Perfect, let's go.
The three, okay. Yeah.
We at Allianz are cyber and cyber claims ready. Welcome to the Allianz Commercial Cyber Claims webinar. It's a pleasure to have you all with us today, and thanks so much for joining. My name is Michael Daum, and I'm heading our cyber claims team. Cyber attacks and events and incidents are still the #1 business risk companies face today, and no entity is fully immune to them. However, companies can successfully prepare, manage, and mitigate their cyber risks. We are fully convinced that our cyber insights and knowledge is useful and can provide direction to companies how to best prepare and respond. Today, we invited 15 subject matter experts in cyber, and we are all very motivated to share our insights and views with you. Well, what can these experts really bring to the table? Well, first, a lot of experience. We've been handling cyber claims now for a decade and have successfully handled more than 5,000 cases. While handling these claims, we really gained a lot of expertise. We focused and specialized our colleagues, and 2 years back, we founded a separate cyber claims unit. We are very passionate about cyber, but not only about the topic itself, also passionate about supporting you before, during, and after a cyber attack. And today's agenda is really written around these 3 phases. We start with before the attack, get an overview and understanding of what's currently happening. We then move on and check what can companies do in order to prepare and respond. And in the next step, as every company will eventually get hit successfully by a cyber attack, we will focus on how to best respond in such a situation. Last but not least, we also want to make sure that you can benefit from our claims experience and further improve your own cyber readiness. Our 15 speakers will bring various angles to the topic, but we also would like to collect your views and thoughts, and that's why in the next 2 hours we'll have various polls so that you can share your own views. In order to participate, please make sure that you use one of the following 3 options to participate. If you're logged in via WebEx, you can directly vote there in the WebEx app. Alternatively, you might want to scan the QR code displayed here in the middle, or last option would be to log into slido.com and use the password AZC-cyber. Yeah, enough of the foreword. Let me straight introduce our first speaker, Thomas Sepp, our Chief Claims Officer. Thomas will talk about cyber claims trends we're seeing this year. Thomas, a pleasure to have you with us. We're much looking forward to your speech. And let me straight hand over to you. The stage is yours.
Michael, thank you very much. Yeah, and welcome to all the audience. It's going to be an exciting afternoon, and I'm quite impressed by actually the lineup of speakers that are joining today and sharing their views. Let me keep it very easy, and I do a little introduction before we get all the experts then on stage to share their presentations. But maybe before I go into that, one quick question to all the audience here. I hope everyone scanned the Slido code or does see it now in the WebEx. The question we have to you is, what's your view on what is the average ransom demand as of second quarter of 2023? So what do we see in case of a ransomware attack in terms of demand from hackers? Is it A, 1 million? We have B, 2.5 million, C, 5 million, and D, 10 million. I hope everyone is having the opportunity to vote, so please put it in. Very good. We already see here some moving parts on the screen. Yeah, 5 million being the front runner. We will resolve the question in a few seconds, on the next slides that I will bring up. But there seems to be a very clear view about 5 million, so we're up in a decent number. Maybe we'll move forward, and I start a little bit with an overview about what's going on in the market. We actually work with a lot of partners and use a lot of intelligence, but if we summarize it very briefly here on the left-hand side, what we see this year in 2023, which is the light blue line, is clearly an increase in ransomware activity in the market. It's up almost 50% compared to last year. Now, there's a little effect in there. We know that there was one ransom group out there, CL0P, that was exploiting a vulnerability in file transfer software, which added a lot to it. But even if we strip that effect out, we're still looking at 35% up. So clearly, hacker activity is up, and we see more ransomware activity coming through this year compared to last year. And people who look at the longer time series will remember that it was pretty much on the rise. There was a short dip when the Ukraine war started, but it seems to be back to the normal pattern of ever-increasing activity. It's also driven a little bit by the fact that we see more ransomware groups being active and more leak sites. So there seems to be also some dynamic in that part of the industry that groups are breaking up and obviously then leveraging their experience on a broader scale. Now, to the question we just had, on the right-hand side of the chart, we have the ransomware payment and the initial demand and what actually was paid. So the correct answer here was then 2.5 million as original demand, and then the actual payment tends to be around 600,000 K. So there's quite a difference between what is the initial demand and what is eventually being paid. But here you also see it from Q4 onwards. The numbers seem to be only knowing one way, which is upwards. That's what we see as a quick snapshot. In the market, we see much more, but we tried to boil it down to a relatively digestible set of information. Now, what do we see within Allianz Commercial and the cyber activity and the cyber insurance we offer? We also see an uptick in 2023, but it's not to the same extent. So if you look at the left-hand side again, you see the increase in 2023, and we're actually also up, but comparably only by 25% up. So same activity that we see in our book, but slightly less pronounced. Given that that is the dynamic we're exposed to, it's probably important to say there needs to be a strong focus, or focus should remain, on risk appetite and risk improvement with our clients where we drive it. Most important, strong detection capabilities, fast response capabilities. We believe that matters most. And in addition, we have our ransomware protection checklist, which is the different blocks underneath, which I'm not going through in great detail. But we believe a well-protected company is necessary to actually stand up against the threat. And I think the dynamics getting ever more interesting with the new NIST 2 framework, laying out clearly the demand and the capabilities required, and also what we see in terms of European regulation around manager responsibility and D&O insurance. There's a clear and rising expectation that cyber threats are taken very serious and companies are prepared for it and not rely on mediocre measures or on luck not being hit, because as Michael said before and in the introduction already, I think it's more a matter of when and not whether you're going to be hit or not. That's what we see in our books. Now, we see also new tactics turning up the heat in the market. What we see on the emerging side from attackers is three things. A stronger trend, and we'll talk more about that a little bit, on data exfiltration. I think the next driver that comes to it, we see an increasing number of ransomware or data extraction cases being made public. As a consequence of that, there's a higher willingness to pay ransom. We clearly can observe that. If we look at those trends in relation to what we see in our specific client relationships, we see today that 75% of the cases actually involve successful sensitive data exfiltration, and that's quite a bit up from 2020, where the number was around about 40%. By now, pretty much every case becomes public. Every case we tracked actually came into public headlines and was known more widely. That's also an increase relative to 2020, where that number did stand at 75. So today, if you have data exfiltration, it's going to go public, and every company needs to be prepared for that. The willingness to pay also went up. Today, we see about 50% of companies finally pay ransom. That's also an uptick by 10 percentage points relative to 2022. So clearly, we see a shift in dynamics, and we see companies that are being exposed to the experience reacting to it, as those numbers indicate. We also see that then on the hacker side that there's attractivity in data exfiltration. Why is that? 3 reasons for that. So the first one, the scope and the amount of personal information is increasing. We all know that. If you go out there and see what information is collected, where do you need to provide personal data, and it's being stored extensively. So it's an attractive pool of information to tap into for that not so great purposes. Also the fact that a lot of outsourcing cloud is happening. As a consequence, we see much more interfaces and APIs, which carry the risk of misconfiguration and other security issues. That is making an opportunity wider for ransomware attackers to get hold of that data. And then we also see, particularly in Europe, but across the world, a tightening of data privacy laws and an increased sensitivity about data being leaked. The tolerance of losing data is going down, and therefore the pressure is up. We also see then as a consequence, we highlighted that at the bottom here, that companies are 2.5 times more likely to pay a ransom if data is exfiltrated, in addition to encrypted. Encrypted you can solve potentially for yourself if your protection and your preparation measures are good, but if this data flows out, you have to react to it, and it's actually then increasing the pressure of a company to solve the problem in the public domain. That was a very quick overview, but clearly what we are concerned and what we're watching with great concern is the fact that data exfiltration is on the rise. Now, that is an interesting consequence in the sense that there are legal implications to it. And so as the next speaker, I'm happy to see Anne and Henning here from Clyde & Co., partners we work with very intensively, to give an overview about the current legal situation in data privacy laws. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. So let us go one step back in history, the year 2018. Do you remember what you did in 2018? Well, there were the Olympic Winter Games in South Korea. Angela Merkel here in Germany got re-elected for the 4th consecutive time. Oh yes, there was the wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. But one more thing. On 25th May 2018, the GDPR entered into force. So 5 years on, looking back, I think it's fair to say that the GDPR has set one of the most influential global standards when it comes for data protection worldwide. It has enhanced data protection rights. It has introduced principles of accountability and of data protection by design and default, organizational duties for all companies handling personal data. And that with extraterritorial effect, applying to all businesses that are conducting their affairs in Europe. But there's also another side to the coin. Politically and economically, the GDPR remains a controversial standard in terms of tech and innovation. And it has been creating significant risks and challenges. Just thinking about data breach notifications, and last but not least, fines and penalties, exposing companies to up to 4% of their global annual turnover. So the somewhat provocative thesis is when it comes to the drivers of social inflation, and when we're looking at nuclear judgments in the United States, fines and penalties under the GDPR might well be our nuclear judgments here in Europe. But how relevant are these? Let's come to our first poll and see what you think. So what is the amount of GDPR fines levied on companies for GDPR breaches? The majority seems to be quite optimistic, just over 2 billion euros. Is that so, Rose?
That's very interesting, Henning. I think some of you overshot it a little. I wanted to focus on some of the significant fines we've seen in the last couple of years. As you will see, some of the key fines have been levied across the big tech. You see Meta, Amazon, and other matters as well. Just taking the most recent fine, 1.2 billion euros against Meta issued by the Irish DPC. This was issued in May 2023 and resulted from a violation alleged against Facebook relating to the transfer of personal data belonging to individuals in the EU across to the US. Now, I appreciate that some of these big hitting fines have been against big tech, but it's important to bear in mind that some of these violations and infringements are infringements that could apply to any organization or any insured, particularly in this case, involving a transfer of data from the EU across to the US. So whilst big tech companies are certainly attracting fines, it's important to bear in mind the landscape in the EU. Now, in terms of number of fines, in 2022, Spain issued 155 fines and Italy fell behind just with 107. So in terms of number of fines, we're seeing Spain and Italy coming right up ahead. But in terms of the value of the fines, it's the Irish DPC that are issuing these big hitting fines you see on the screen. What we can see from this is a serious approach by the regulators, and it's worth noting that these big fines issued by the Irish DPC hasn't been decided by that regulator alone. Most of the fines issued have come to agreement by several regulators across the EU coming to this view together. Now, Thomas mentioned earlier the willingness to pay higher ransoms because of data exfiltration. And obviously, data has a value. But how much of a value? I wanted to take an English High Court decision by way of example. In this case of Armstrong, a decision was handed down in the High Court in July this year. It involved a professional services firm experiencing a ransomware attack. Confidential and commercially sensitive information was threatened to be released on the dark web, and if they didn't make the blackmail payment, the threat actors would release the funds. So what did they do in this case? You would expect that sometimes a ransom payment is made, but in this case, a professional services firm sought an injunction from the English High Court. They successfully obtained the injunction, which meant that they could enforce it against persons unknown. Those persons unknown includes the threat actor who perpetrated the attack. Now, what is the value of an injunction if you can't enforce it against an unknown threat actor? But in this case, Armstrong Watson obtained an injunction anyway. And I think it really illustrates that it's not just the payment of a ransom that organizations are faced with to prevent disclosure of data, but increasingly using legal mechanisms to prevent further disclosure. I think 2 points are worth bearing in mind here. In this case, we're dealing with a professional services firm. So it has obligations not only to the data protection regulator, but in this case, the professional regulator because they owe professional obligations. The timing is also important to bear in mind. They sought an injunction before a ransom was paid. Now, the follow-up question for you to consider is an injunction worth obtaining, even if a ransom is paid, but perhaps to mitigate against litigation risk or further republication of data? So that's worth something thinking about. Now, against that backdrop, what are we facing in terms of the evolving data privacy and security landscape? I wanted to flag to you the prospect of artificial intelligence. It's a hot topic that everyone's been discussing. From an EU perspective, the EU aims to reach agreement by the end of this year with a new act called the AI Act. In contrast, the UK will not be adopting legislation, but it will instead adopt principles to reflect the sectors and the operational requirements for each sector in taking a risk-based approach. So even from a UK-EU perspective, Brexit notwithstanding, we're seeing a divergence in the way different approaches are being taken with respect to AI. There's also, of course, the EU Digital Operational Resilience Act, also known as DORA. DORA regulates the information and communication technology security of financial entities, and it sits alongside other regulation with respect to data privacy. Now, it's come into force this year, but will only apply from 17 January 2025. But it's something relevant for financial entities regulated at EU level to consider. It's not just the GDPR you have to worry about, but potentially other legislation. Now, biometric data is also a hot topic, and I'll deal with that more in greater detail in subsequent slides. But the sensitivity of information unique to an individual, which you can no longer change, is certainly something to think about. And also social inflation. Now, Henning mentioned the nuclear judgments. What are we seeing with the value of claims increasing?
So certainly a number of challenges out there, and while we have so far been very much focused on fines and first-party losses, business interruption and expenses following from a data incident, let's take a look at cyber liability and the relevance of cyber liability claims. How relevant have they been in the past? That's our second poll. And somewhat surprisingly, there's now low going into the lead. A mixed view between low, medium, and high. I guess it's a split, and we'll see where that takes us through the rest of the presentation. I have a magic number for you, 2,500 euros. That is actually taken from a court judgment awarding a customer following a data breach damages against the company. 2,500 euros, probably not very significant and not something to be concerned about. Actually, one of the revolutionary aspects of the GDPR was that in its Article 82, it introduced a new count for damages, and that is for immaterial damages following a data breach. So to say, for the pain and suffering of the customers. And that has triggered a lot of debate. This is the view right into the main courtroom at the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg. 11 proceedings are at the moment pending with the court, looking precisely, on the one hand, at fines and the level of fines and the thresholds, but on the other hand, very much at cyber liability, Article 82, and the thresholds for customers bringing such liability claims. The first judgment was rendered indeed in May this year in the matter Österreichische Post coming from Austria, where a domestic court had declined awarding a customer damages. Now, the European Court of Justice looked at it and concluded that, in principle, any infringement of the GDPR can justify such a claim. And while there need to be damages and causation proven by the claimant, there's no higher level of seriousness of the breach required for there to be a claim eligible under Article 82 of the GDPR. So certainly the judgment has not been a showstopper. On the contrary, and there's quite a bit more to come from the court in Luxembourg, but also from the courts worldwide.
And on that note, I'm going to take you on a transatlantic tour as to how this is developing briefly in the UK and also in the US. From a UK perspective, it is clear that wrongful data collection claims is here to stay. This is shaped not only by the backdrop of the claims, but the evolving legislation. We have the UK departing from the GDPR and adopting the Data Protection and Digital Information Bill. This is making its way through the Parliament and on one hand makes exceptions to reduce the obligations for certain sectors with respect to the Privacy, Electronic and Communications Directive. But on the other hand, if you breach that legislation, the PECR, fines are now increased. So we're seeing a heavy consequence to any potential fines. Cookies are a focus for the regulator. The ICO, the Data Protection Regulator, has indicated an interest in looking at how companies or websites monitor cookies of users. And finally, I wanted to mention briefly a class action against Meta, or more commonly known as Facebook, in the Competition Appeals Tribunal. And what's interesting about this case is 45 million users of Facebook are making a claim of £2.2 billion in damages based on Facebook's alleged abuse in its dominant market position on 3 grounds, one of them including an unfair data requirement, basically allowing Facebook to collect and share users' data on and off the platform. Now, what is really striking is how we see a data privacy claim, I think, essentially shoehorned as an anti-competitive claim, making it clear that plaintiffs are willing to try and seek redress with respect to data collection infringements, even in an anti-competitive sense. Now, what about the US landscape? Now, we have colleagues in the US who have first-hand knowledge about these topics, but I thought it would be worth flagging the advances made in that jurisdiction. From a perspective of biometric information, the Biometric Information Privacy Act, or BIPA, has been a clear point of focal interest in Illinois. It's resulted in heavy-hitting judgments, not just because an infringement is considered to be a violation of a privacy right, but each violation attracts damages. So if you scan a fingerprint of the same individual 5 times, that's 5 violations, attracting damages of up to $5,000 per violation or per scan. Now, in the case of White Castle, if you think about the fact that there are 9,000 persons with multiple violations, the company indicated they could be facing liability in billions of dollars. Now, that's certainly scary, but let me take it a step further by flagging the Meta Pixel litigation. At the moment, it's being focused on Meta and Facebook with respect to the tracking of pixels and websites, particularly with healthcare providers. They're doing that mainly through the Video Privacy Act, and whilst this is a really old piece of legislation, it does have potential to be far-reaching. Fortunately, there are signs that there could be limits. There was a judgment in September this year which indicated that the scope of the legislation will be limited to industries that use video or track videos as part of their business rather than incidental to. The main takeaway from this is that it's clearly a hotly contested, evolving landscape. The use of some new legislation like BIPA and older legislation like the Video Privacy Protection Act to pursue different sorts of claims funded by plaintiffs who have an appetite to get a large settlement out of these claims. So the last poll that we have today, how relevant do you think cyber liability claims will be in the future? That was a resounding response. Everyone thinks it's very high, which is a pretty scary prospect. But one thing to consider is how all of that will change increasingly with new legislation coming by way of the EU directive. And the EU directive provides an opportunity for EU consumers to have access to justice and seeking remedies by way of compensation, repair, and reimbursement. The key aspect is a collective action with a prospect of collective settlements. Now, what does that look like, Henning?
Well, I think after the final poll, not much education is further needed, but let me just come back to our magic number, 2,500. I'm pretty sure not many of you were concerned out there, but if you multiply it with, say, 33,000 customers, you're getting to very significant numbers. And these are not artificial. These stem from a real-life case out in the German and European markets. And as you just said, Rose, with the representative action now being implemented across Europe, the tools are there for collective redress, supported by litigation funding. So a real exposure that we will certainly be facing much more in the future. So I guess the lesson really is get cyber ready, get cyber claims, and get cyber liability ready, and I'd say with the right partners. So Michael, Rishi, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Many thanks, Henning and Rose. Thanks as well to Thomas. We'll move on to the next step now. And well, if I summarize, that sounded rather frightening, I have to say, what Thomas and you reported. So the key question, so to speak, is, can companies really meaningfully respond? And that's going to be the focus of our next 2 sessions. We'll start, the 2 of us, Rishi and I. Let me briefly introduce my colleague Rishi, who is the global head of our cyber risk consultants. Rishi, pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you.
And maybe let me start with the positive news right away. We strongly believe what we've seen, that companies can meaningfully prepare and there's room for improvement and they can respond indeed to these attacker threats. What they need to do so is to just shift a bit the focus, because defense has changed. And let me explain that a bit using the next slide here. So, traditional defense has been really very much focused on prevention. So prevention with the ultimate goal to keep attackers out of your network, away from your devices. And companies further invest because of the increasing threats. And you would see it here on that green line that, well, the more you invest typically in prevention, well, the less successful cyber attacks you will face. But unfortunately, there's limitations and there might even be a misperception. And that is, in that green curve, that once you have invested enough into prevention, you basically have 0 successful attacks, which is not the case, as our claims experience tells us. So in reality, what we see is more something like that red curve you see here, meaning that there is a gap remaining. Regardless of how much you really invest, there will still be a gap and there will be successful attacks coming through. Let me illustrate that a bit using an example, and I picked training. So say we have a company that trains its employees every 2 years on information security, and that's a really important cornerstone of everyone's information security. And then they notice there's more phishing emails coming in, they are well written, and more employees fall and click. So they decide, well, we're going to increase the number of trainings. We do it annually, maybe quarterly, maybe even monthly. And the ratio of its employees clicking on these malicious email drops, but it will not come to 0. We're all humans and we fall for certain things, and that's one of the key reasons for that gap. And there's even more. Let me mention the 3 we put on the slide. So I already mentioned attackers getting better and better. So that phishing email might have been written by generative artificial intelligence and might have been tailor-made. 2 more things we wanted to mention. Well, security always you have to balance with functionality, with comfort, with cost. And last but not least, at least in mid-corp and large organizations, it's really, really difficult that you have well protected each and every device in such a huge environment. So as a first verdict, what companies should do is they should really accept that gap, that an attacker will be successful every once in a while, but then shift their focus and add detection and response capabilities. That's important because prevention basically drives the frequency of your attacks, whereas detection and response are really the ones responsible for, well, how significant will your loss be, and will it be a rather tiny IT incident, or might it turn to become a corporate crisis? We brought two real-life examples today. Let me start with the first one to illustrate a bit why that gap exists. First example is a German insured here in food processing. They are really quite savvy and have a good information security, IT security rolled out here in Germany, as well as to a couple of foreign subsidiaries. But they really missed to have the same security standards rolled out to a subsidiary in Eastern Europe. And guess what happened? The attackers attacked right there, were successful, encrypted the whole network, and by that, the whole business in that country came to a full halt. So you might wonder, well, why did they not roll out? And in general, there is many reasons why you have such gaps. It could be you just missed it. Well, maybe not the whole country, but certain devices. It could be you were not successful with your governance to roll that out across the whole company environment. It could also be like merger and acquisitions. We often see that once a company has been acquired, that it will get connected even before the security standard has reached the same level. So these are reasons and I hope it showed you that there is always a certain lack of full overview at last in mid-corp and large organizations. So we brought a second example, more on comfort cost, and let me hand over to Rishi.
Thank you, Michael. Second example is about our European client. It's a consumer electronics retailer. During COVID, they suffered a ransomware attack. What happened, as with other companies, they allowed their users to log in remotely. In this case, the company didn't provide corporate laptops or desktop, and they allowed their users to directly log in using their personal devices. However, they had their multi-factor authentications enabled on those PCs, so users were able to connect remotely. However, after a certain time, they complained about disconnectivity issues and so on. So for comfort of their users, our insured allowed them to connect directly without MFA. So the prevention, which was in terms of multi-factor authentication, was bypassed. And that proved to be proven to be a vulnerability which hackers exploited. They found their way through VPN to the core network. They escalated their privileges and planted malware, and this is how this ransomware attack materialized. So what we understood from this attack, this claim, is one, the comfort of the users was given priority than the prevention of actual security, and plus the cost cutting was another reason. So this could have been otherwise protected easily. This company was otherwise very good into their cybersecurity. Over to you, Michael.
Thanks, Rishi. So let's move on and have a look at the value, so to speak, of these detection and response. Because what we see in reality is that often companies really struggle with to capture that value because, well, it costs money. It is an investment. And we try to help companies understand of this value. And let me explain two scenarios, and then we would like to have also your view on that difference, that factor you see here. So scenario A is the attacker is in principle successful and attacks, intrudes the machine of one employee. And then what they typically do is they try to scan the network to escalate privileges. But in scenario A, the detection tool stops them, contains them, and it stays a local incident with some reaction, response, and some restoration going on. Compared to that, take scenario B, where the attacker then is really successful. And what typically happens is, as I said, privilege escalation. The attackers try to get a hold of administrative accounts and credentials, and they typically exfiltrate data, as Thomas was already mentioning, sensitive data, so they might face third-party claims. Well, and the last step then is typically to encrypt the network, and then that leads to a business interruption, and the business interruption is our number one loss position we pay the most for. So we did that analysis ourselves in our claims data, but we really would like to ask you in another slide, Paul, what's your perception of that factor, that difference in loss amount of scenarios A and B? So please vote. The options are times 10, times 100, times 1,000, or times 10,000. So just cannot see it yet. Yes. Wow. Okay. We still keep that open maybe a bit. So yes, so factor 1,000 seems to be the top pick, and that's really interesting because our analysis showed that it's closest to factor 1,000 indeed. So that's quite substantial. So a claim that costed, say, 20,000 euros in scenario A would turn into a 20 million case in scenario B. So that's further proof. Thank you for that difference, that factor, the value. So, well, the question then is our detection and response, are they rolled out accordingly already in the companies amongst our insureds? And I think we have Rishi, we have the top expert. You've done many risk dialogues.
Sure.
And Rishi, please, if you could provide a bit more insight to us of how the reality looks like.
Absolutely. Thank you, Michael. So let's look into the mindset, how it limits the investment into detection and response capabilities. And I'm going to touch on the small businesses as well a little bit. Before I jump into that, there are a few elements which we think are missing for our clients, learning from our experience into claims. Those are points of improvement. Obviously, not all of them applicable to one particular client. So first is understanding how the adversaries work. So who your enemies are, how many they are, their tools, techniques, processes, procedures. Once you know that, you are able to channelize your efforts to protect your network, your assets. Second is assume breach mindset. In other words, detect and respond mindset. So you can't defend every single attack coming towards you. But instead of that, think about there will be a breach at one point. How are you going to defend that? And that leads to furthermore, which is proactive threat detection than reactive. We know hackers are using AI-based tools, so we need to ramp up our efforts as well in terms of detection. So there are lots of AI-based tools available. Beyond that, there are user behavior analytics and so on. So what it does, once you proactively look into your detection, your response becomes faster as well. And that reduces the dwell time, which hackers staying into the network. And finally, you can't do everything. Basically goes back to my first element as well, knowing your adversaries, which is quite difficult. But there are companies like threat intel companies, they provide very good data, including advanced persistent threats, new ransomware gangs, and so on. So doing that in-house would be quite expensive as compared to buying it from externally. And lots of our large clients also rely on third parties for that part. So all in all, these are the missing elements. So I would like to use a Slido poll next. I would like you to, using Slido poll, just categorize prevention, detection, response from 1 to 3. In your experience, in your organization, how do you see them? Okay. All right, prevention tops at the moment. Okay, great. So let's quickly look at our own results. How did it go?
Wait a second.
Okay. So what we observed is exactly same what the poll showed just now. So in our case, prevention tops. 90% of our clients invest into prevention, followed by detection and response, and which is quite understandable because prevention is the most important at the start of infancy of the cybersecurity program, followed by detection and response, and more clients are investing into that. However, when we look at the smaller and medium clients, it seems like cybersecurity is a bit of afterthought, and they are not there yet, which has been underlined by CNBC's report last year, which showed only 4% of small business owners say cybersecurity is the biggest threat to their own businesses. Okay, in the next slide, I will quickly show what Allianz Risk Consultant do, learning from our claims experiences. So what we do, we talk to our clients in risk dialogue, our risk assessment, client meetings, and so on. We focus on detection and response capabilities and look for positive indicators. So looking into real-time vulnerabilities, fixing your vulnerabilities, patching them quickly, reducing the dwell time, as I mentioned earlier. That goes into your remediation workflow, your BCP, DRP plans. And defense in depth, quite important. One layer finishes, one layer exploited, second would be there, and so on. And that goes into faster and more accurate response, which is RTOs and RPOs. And this is how we help our clients year on year improving their cybersecurity. We have global network of risk consultant providing insights and benchmarking directly benefiting to our clients. That's all from me. I will hand over to my colleagues from Allianz, who is going to talk about what are the challenges in ramping up detection and response capabilities.
So my name is Alex Papst. I'm the Deputy CISO of Allianz Group, and I'm very excited to be joined by two esteemed colleagues, Michael Sauermann, who's the, and I have to read this, Head of Forensic Technology, Germany and EMEA, and KPMG is one of our key response and forensic partners for that. Super excited to have you on board. And directly to my right, we've got Robert Feser, who is the head of our Allianz Cyber Defense Center, or the ACDC as we call it in Allianz, because we also want to be a bit hip sometimes in cyber. We're going to have a conversation and pick up on some of the topics that we talked about before, or that the colleagues talked about before. And just to kick it off, Thomas Sepp talked about, there being an increase in cyber incidents or cyber events in 2023 so far. Is this something that you, Michael, have also been able to observe in your clients? And if so, was there some specific kind of attack that you've seen in the wild?
Yeah, Alex, first of all, thank you very much for having me and taking part on that panel discussion. Yeah, to answer your question, basically, yes, to clearly answer that. On the one hand, I see an increase on incident, but even more, I see a higher impact on actually that's reflected to our clients. Mm-hmm. So whenever a company is actually being hit, it costs them a lot of burden, to recover from that incident, and that may even take a couple of months until they're back in business. And in the meantime, they lose quite a lot of money. We heard about ransomware in the past, and I guess everyone on this session is already aware on ransomware and what it does. But I would like to underline a second aspect which comes along with the data breach that sometimes comes along with a ransomware attack, and then it's called a double extortion. So basically what it means is, first of all, the attacker goes into the network, they steal data, maybe they delete the backups and the recovery points, the technical recovery points, and then they encrypt the whole network. So you have a double extortion, and the attacker is basically asking for ransomware as well. This is exactly the worst situation that you can imagine. And on top of that, and that is something that I see during the last couple of years, the amount of data that has been stolen from companies increases every year. And right now I have some clients who lost like a 2-digit terabyte amount of data. The biggest one actually that I have right now, they lost data which almost has been published in the darknet, which if you would print that on a paper, it would be a pile of over 40 kilometers in height. So it's really a big amount of data. And imagine things like you have to identify PII in that, personal identifiable information, third-party data, or maybe business secrets that you don't want to be published in the darknet. On top of that, I know it's a long answer, but on top of that, I would like also to point out a second big attack, which is cyber supply chain. Basically, the attacker here tries actually to get into the supply chain of companies and influence that supply chain. And what I mean, for example, there has been a big software company in the US, I won't name it here, but basically what the hacker does is they manipulated the software tool, so the product of that software company, and afterwards the manipulated software has been rolled out to the clients, to several thousand of customers, and that is one of the worst situations. I applaud for the hacker's capability to do that, don't get me wrong, but on the other hand, it's such a nightmare for whoever that happens. But this is what I see right now.
Great. And Robert, from our global Allianz footprint, which I think is also substantial, do you see similar patterns observed?
Absolutely. So in some areas I can echo what Michael said, but the overall amount of security incidents, just purely based by the number, seems to be stable in the last couple of years. But the impact is much higher. So if someone comes in, he really can damage the company. What we saw is, on the other side, is an increase in investigations. So that is called work which is done before a breach is confirmed. That is due to the fact that we roll out more sensors, that we collect more data, that we have more visibility into IT. On the other side, there is a certain trend. What we can also see, those, you call it supply chain attacks, we call it third-party attacks. And for me, it feels like that all those techniques and tools developed and tested over a couple of years against large enterprises are now getting reused against smaller companies.
Thank you. So we heard from Michael and Rishi just now that awareness and prevention are probably reaching the end of what they can do, and that we should focus on detection and resilience. What's your take on that, Robert?
I would say both is fundamentally required. So if you look at awareness was super important in the past, it's super important in the present, and it will be even more important in the future. AI brings a new technology, a new toolkit for adversaries to run more handcrafted, more custom-tailored conversations. And for that, it's even more important to have a really aware end user and employee to distinguish between what is fake and what is reality. On the other side, you also need to start investing even more into detection. In the past, it was a little bit more easier for companies with protecting the perimeter. So you know your premises, you know your data centers, you know where your applications and data is hosted, you put a fence around it and you monitor that fence. But that perimeter, as of today, looks like a Swiss cheese. So it has a lot of holes in it, and the perimeter is getting shifted out more and more to the identity and the endpoint itself. That is also due to disruptive elements like the public cloud move. So you also need to invest there into new tools and technologies.
Great. And Michael, is that something you would echo from your client base?
I would certainly. Basically, a couple of years ago, when I've been asked exactly that question, I got the answer, hey, I just need to invest into prevention, and then I won't get hit. This is a huge mistake, and I kept praying over the years, hey, please don't do that. Please see prevention, detection, and response at equal shares and take care on each of them and invest in each of those areas. I mean, for example, you can have the best fire prevention system in your company or even in your private house, but that does not prevent you of being hit by a fire maybe over time. And the same applies for cyber incidents. So basically, as we heard before, to my understanding, companies will be hit over the course of the years. And if you are not able to respond to a cyber incident, it will hit you largely and heavily. And that is something that you need to prevent in any case.
So let's pick up on that one, right? We also heard that from Rishi, I think, who said, an attack, it's not whether you're going to be attacked, it's when you're going to be attacked. I think that's one of the worst kept industry secrets in cyber. What's your view on that, and what can companies really do? And maybe also, what have you seen in your company base or in your client base that successful companies have done?
Yeah, it sounds very easy, but I would say train, and again, train. I mean, if you are not, able to react to a cyber incident and you haven't run any crisis drills to really train that won't work out. I mean, you can write down do a lot of papers, but in the end you need to really practice that and redo that exercise like a fire drill. Yeah, right? This only works if you practice that over time. And please consider to also integrate other company entities, for example, lawyers, need to, the Security Operations Center, Computer Emergency Response Teams, crisis communications, crisis management, all these people need to interact, and this needs to be trained, and the roles and responsibilities need to be assigned. And another thing which is very important, in the end you need someone who actually can decide on what to do in a cyber incident. I mean, I had cases where actually we had to decide on a call whether or not a company will be separated from the internet, because then you interrupt the connection between the hacker and the IT network of the customer, right? And this is a really brutal situation you are in, and you have to decide maybe within 1 hour whether or not you cut that line. And in the end, this costs you a lot of money. We know that, and there's certain risk associated to that. But someone needs to be there who understands that and who can react to that and can take a decision. And I would call that cyber in the boardroom awareness, and that's very important, in my opinion.
And I think one point you made, without making it clear, right, you need to make sure you involve everyone from that organization, right, from CEO down, and we certainly do that in Allianz. Robert,
Yes,
what's your view on that one?
I will reuse one of the words you said, train, and let me start with that one. For me, it's basically three things. The one thing is train your team. The second thing is know your roles and responsibilities during that special situation, during that crisis. And the third one is partner up with others. So train your team. Your team needs to be comfortable with the tools they're using. It's anyhow a super stressful situation if you have a ransomware attack, and they should be at least not think about how to click and how to move around within that tools. They need to be feel comfortable. On the other side, when it comes to the crisis drill, you immediately have different roles involved. Not only the Cyber Defense Center, you also have the COO, the CISO, the head of communications. You also need to maybe do an internal communication or external one. There are a lot of roles getting implemented. If I look at Allianz, we do exactly such kind of crisis drill where we test it paper-based. Does everyone knows his role and how is the process flow? And the last one, partner up with others. For me, in two different dimensions. The one is on the commercially side. Have incident response retainer in place. Because if there is a special situation, you need the expert immediately on the ground, helping you out of that situation. And it's basically an extension of your own workforce. And on the other side, non-commercially, join sharing communities. If you learn something out of a sharing community about a certain spam campaign hitting someone else, you can take that information and use it like a proactive vaccine and immunization of your own system.
Yeah. Cool, thank you. And now let's look forward into the future a bit, right? I think at least for us, there's a lot of noise around AI and new threats, and I know boards are asking for it. Most certainly our board is asking for it. What would you say are some of the things we're going to see more of in the future, and how can we maybe even prepare for those today?
Yeah.
Robert?
If we start with the adversary side, for me, a generative AI looks like the afterburn to fly from the moon to the Mars within a couple of days. So they don't need months anymore, it's a couple of days. Why? Because with the help of generative AI, it is a toolkit to create custom-tailored spam emails, if we stay with a phishing example, and that is multiplied with a large volume. So we're talking here about thousands of customized, individualized emails sent to specific persons where it's hard to predict if it's real or if it's fake. Yep. On the defense side, it also brings certain benefits what a defense team can leverage. So analyzing data, summarizing data will become much more easier. And it's more like a defense team is getting more pushed in the direction of give me the haystack instead of asking for specific data. Give me the entire haystack and we will find, with the help of new tools, the needle in there.
Great. Michael, a view from maybe the bigger industry?
Yeah, well, I think there are two additional items that I would like to outline on top of that. The first one is, I mean, we all know about ChatGPT. There's a huge hype around ChatGPT, and there's a lot of power within ChatGPT. And for example, also attackers, and I call them script kiddies right now. I mean, not the ones that are not that experienced, they can ask ChatGPT for certain, for example, malware. I mean, you cannot ask ChatGPT for a malware, then you would get a reply, hey, I'm not allowed to do that. But you can ask the questions differently, and then you will get back maybe the results that you like. Another big thing that is related to phishing attacks is about deepfakes. I mean, we know that phishing and the careless employee is one of the worst scenarios that companies encounter. So you don't want to have employees that just click on anything and open any link that they receive, but rather have aware employees that know about the cyber risk associated. But now think about deepfakes. So for example, a scenario where AI mimics voices and faces, let's say in a video conference system. And all of a sudden, the employee thinks, okay, hey, this is my boss. He looks like him or her. It has the same voice as her or him. That's a really big thing. And if, for example, your boss would tell you, hey, could you please transfer a certain amount of money on that account, maybe you would do that. So it's another kind of attack vector, I believe.
Cool. Thank you, Michael. And I can assure you we're all real. We're not deepfake, so that's the good news. But with that, I think, we've heard that even, with the best prevention, detection, and response in place, some attacks cannot be prevented, unfortunately. And that's really where our Allianz commercial folks or team comes in. And with that, let me hand over to Bobby, Tilman, and Dominic to tell you a bit more about that.
Thank you, Alex. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome also from my side to the Cyber Claims Conference 2023. My name is Dominik Geistanger and I'm a claims professional in the AGCS claims department with a specific focus on cyber claims. And together with my colleagues Bobby Morell from AGCS UK and Tilman Ohlinger from Allianz Germany, our topic here today is success factors of handling and mitigating cyber claims. Bobby and I will provide the AGCS view on this topic, and Tilman will add the Allianz Germany perspective, so that together we will provide you with the Allianz commercial view on this topic. So we will talk today a little bit about do's and don'ts when facing cyber claims as an organization. And from my personal experience, I can tell you that these situations are extremely stressful for the people of the affected companies who have to deal with this cyber crisis. Imagine your organization so severely affected that it's even unclear which method to use when communicating with each other. Email is not working. The phones are probably dead. Cell phones will probably work. But then again, how do you discuss next steps and strategy with a broader internal audience that consists maybe of 10, 20 people? The usual tools for community calls won't also probably work. At the same time, a multitude of decisions have to be made, and the sooner the better. Time is of absolutely critical importance in these situations. In some cases, our clients can see in real time what the attackers are doing in their IT environment and which systems are currently being encrypted. But they can't do anything about it because maybe the necessary experts are not yet onboarded, or the next steps are altogether unclear, especially, for example, whether to conduct a full shutdown of the whole IT environment. In one case, we were notified in the morning, so I called my contact a little bit later, and we talked about what happened, what support we could offer as an insurer, what the next steps may be. He was the CFO of the company and therefore quite heavily involved in the crisis management process. And in the end, we agreed to talk again in the evening. So I call him then, and he answers the phone and immediately replies, sorry, who are you again? Have we already talked today? So he couldn't remember talking to me in the morning because he was in such an extraordinary situation. Interestingly, though, he couldn't remember me, but he could remember at least some of the advice that I gave him in the morning. So that was good. But not only for the people in the affected companies, these situations are really stressful. Also, on the Allianz side, we as claims handlers, things also get a little bit hectic from time to time, especially when the incident is discovered Friday evenings or on the weekends, because that's unfortunately the time when the attackers are most active in the systems of their victims. So in order to help you to be better prepared for a potential cyber incident, here are some important success factors when dealing with such a situation. And with that, I hand over to Tilman.
Thank you, Dominik. One learning from handling several hundred cyber claims each year for our customers is to regard any attack as a severe crisis of the whole organization and not as a mere IT incident, especially when we're talking about ransomware attacks, encrypted or even extradited data. Not taking it serious can have far-reaching consequences. To give you an example, in one case, a company was hit by a ransomware attack and the data was partly encrypted. But before external support was called in, the affected system was restored from the latest backup. But since the attackers had intruded the system sometime before the encryption, the backup was affected itself and the system was reinfected. Through this autonomous recovery process, new complications arose, such as important forensic traces were lost, and the forensic analysis that had been commissioned was also compromised and had to be redone. So in total, the whole recovery effort was significantly higher. So you ask yourselves, how can such a situation like this be avoided? We know it is difficult to make the right assessment right from the start and take the appropriate measure, especially since Dominik just said the attacks are most likely to occur on Friday afternoons or in general when external help is difficult to reach. And therefore the insurance cover includes a crisis hotline that can be reached 24 hours a day and 7 days a week without any additional cost. And we highly recommend to make use of this hotline because figures of the past show that not only a few cases could have been or could be solved by calling the hotline and talk to the professionals there. For our given example, obviously the advice would have been to test the backup before making use of it if it was affected by the attack as well. So when you think about the consequences a potential attack might have to your organization, you also want to think about all the parts that have to be involved. And when you think about the PR impact an attack might have, that would be the sales department and the communications department. Also, of course, the crisis management. Obviously, we want to involve the IT department for the system recovery. The finance colleagues will have to deal with possible business interruption. And the legal people will have to deal with ransom demands and compliance issues as well as data breaches. And nonetheless, you want to involve your insurer to get an awareness of your exposure and monitor your security standards, and above all, to have a continuous insurance cover. With that, I hand over to Dominik again for more details.
Thank you, Tilman. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you have heard this phrase countless times before, so apologies for having to hear from us today quite a lot. But time is really of the essence when dealing with a cyber incident. And to visualize that, I brought to you the slide you're seeing here. And there on the horizontal axis, you see the timeline, kind of the life cycle of a cyber attack. And the vertical axis shows you the final financial loss originating from such an incident. This slide was developed by us by analyzing our own cases. And based on that, we came to the conclusion that the response capability of an affected company have a significant effect on the financial loss that originates from such an event. These capabilities really make a difference, and the network of external service partners that can support an affected company is a major asset in these situations. Of course, if you have a capable cyber insurer with a good vendor network, then the insurer can assist by arranging certain agreements. From an insurer perspective, expectation management is also an important topic. So as a general rule, we as an insurer are happy to offer support in order for you to be better able to handle the crisis. But, and that's the important part, we cannot handle the crisis for you. Because in the end, we are only an external party, a third party with an external view on a situation that needs to be addressed by taking into account a holistic view of all affected major aspects of the company. So, of course, the aim of an affected company should be to ensure short response times and decision-making processes throughout the whole incident handling. And when we talk about enhancing cyber readiness of an organization, here is a selection of important topics to consider. Of course, companies are highly individual, and one topic that is important for one company isn't necessarily also a deciding factor for another one. So this is only a collection of general topics that are important from our point of view. And at the core of it all lies a proper understanding of the cyber exposure of an organization. What role does IT play in your organization and especially your value chain? How does it affect your company when certain or all IT processes are not available anymore? Which systems are the most critical ones and therefore have to be restored first? Where can workarounds be implemented? And starting from that, develop a sound crisis management and business continuity plan. What is essential is, however, that these plans are not only developed and then kept in the drawer, but that those plans are also regularly tested. My colleague Robin Roha will talk about that in more detail in the next presentation. Also very important, especially when we talk about listed companies or companies that hold a lot of personal information, is a sound PR strategy with a focus on cyber incidents. Because when a company above a certain size experiences such an event, then eventually the press will take up on it. And when that happens, the organization is confronted with hundreds, maybe thousands of inquiries that revolve around this topic. And even if the organization has a well-prepared PR department, it probably won't be able to handle all that. And so you will need to include external support. And the underlying general strategy that you can prepare in advance and that we would also recommend for our customers. You will hear more about this topic also from Alexander Fink from CNC in the next presentation. And then one should also deal with the question, which public authorities have to be involved in the incident handling process. Of course, data protection agencies come to mind when personal data is affected by the incident, or law enforcement agencies when there's a suspicion of criminal activity, which usually there is. And other kinds of businesses, of course, have to include other public authorities. Think about the financial regulators in the financial services industry. What most organizations, however, don't know is that those public authorities can also offer additional support in these situations. We had cases where the FBI in the US was able to seize exfiltrated data at US-based cloud service providers. And the German cybercrime units are usually happy to give advice based on their experience with certain criminal elements. Also, in larger organizations, the engagement of external service providers can take quite a lot of time because of the internal guidelines and the resulting need to involve various departments across the organization. Procurement, the legal department, maybe even the board offices need to sign off on an engagement. And that is time that is better spent elsewhere in these situations. And we therefore strongly encourage our customers to prepare these engagements in advance. And in connection with that, also obtain prior written approval from Allianz where necessary. But that is a topic about which my colleague Bobby Morel will speak in more detail now. So I'm handing over to Bobby.
Thanks, Dominic. So one of the key factors in ensuring the successful resolution of a cyber claim is involving your insurers early. We've already heard from Dominic about how speed of response can have a significant impact on the value of the claim. Therefore, it's standard practice that your policy will include requirements specifying that you must notify promptly or within a specific time frame. Equally, your policy may include requirements for prior consent to be obtained before certain costs are incurred. If you involve your insurers early, you will have a clear picture of what information insurers need. You'll be able to obtain all necessary consents and ensure that the insurance recovery process runs as smoothly as possible. In addition, involving your insurers early means that you'll be able to leverage your insurers and their vendors' expertise in order to minimise the incident impact. Many clients will have never experienced a cyber incident previously, whereas insurers and their vendors will have experienced many, and this will often include incidents that are very similar to the one that you're currently going through. As a result, insurers and their vendors have data around threat actors and specific ransomware strains, which can be useful in determining negotiating strategy and what discounts can be achieved if you do decide to pay the ransom. Insurers also have access to pre-negotiated rates with vendors. This is significant as the rates that an insured has access to in an emergency situation are likely to be much less favourable. Equally, whilst an insured might have worked with vendors previously, they will need specialist advice on certain points. So they might have worked with lawyers previously, but they might not be lawyers who are well versed in the relevant notification obligations to regulators and customers. Allianz also has access to internal technical expertise, such as our colleagues in Allianz Technology, which can be helpful to act as an independent sense check on what IT vendors are suggesting. If you do decide to pay the ransom, as I'm sure you'll be aware, there are restrictions around this from a sanctions perspective. By involving your insurers early, you're able to get access to expert advice and guidance on whether you're able to pay the ransom and therefore avoid any risk of being in breach of sanctions. So we thought it'd be helpful to bring these points to life with a real-life claims example. In the incident in question, the client discovered suspicious activity in their network and initiated incident response measures. They confirmed that there had been unauthorised access to the system and a large amount of data had been exfiltrated. They were able to contain the spread of the ransomware and therefore didn't need to engage with the threat actor. They did, however, need to evaluate and assess the compromised data. They approached their normal vendor, who quoted a fee of 10 million euros. The client then approached Allianz in order to verify whether this was a reasonable offer. With the assistance of our colleagues from Allianz Technology, we determined that this offer was higher than it should have been. We were able to work with the insured to identify an alternative service provider who was able to provide the same service for 30% of the original quote. So this is just one of the many examples of times where insurers' involvement has resulted in a saving to the insured. I'm now going to hand over to my colleagues Robin and Alexander, who are going to speak about managing cyber crisis as a team.
So, many thanks. We're very happy on this afternoon to present more on a realistic daily basis the partnership approach, because this was mentioned and I was very grateful, because we very often see that the biggest hurdle is the silo. And the silo is that everyone is thinking, especially it's an IT issue, we are there, we are coping in it at the end, oh, we have to add one partner, another one, and another one. And so the teaming aspect is one key, and I hope we can illustrate in the next minutes to you very concretely how this is looking alike. So let's jump here on especially 3 core issues, and I'm more than happy that, Robin, you will add to these in a short time. The first one is the complexity itself, because it's an IT issue and everybody is talking IT, but the public and the customers and those who are really interested, they don't have a clue about IT terms and specialities. And so one key is to understand the core fact at the beginning and to reduce the complexity and work on it. And it's not an IT issue, it's a top management topic. Therefore, you have to be aware that it's coming top down, and you saw on the previous slides from the colleagues that presented earlier, it's not the incident, it's a management issue. And it's in combining internal and external resources from the beginning. So it's legal, it's communications, it's sales, it's whatever is affected. But we very often experience, and I can just look back 2 months ago where a company was hit. Again, it was IT. IT was dominating, and I like IT, so don't misunderstand me. IT was dominating the sessions, the meeting, what was the impact on the customers, on the other things was cut down to 5 minutes from the 1 hour crisis meetings, and the rest was IT talk. So you really, from the beginning, have to work very closely and combine with the other experts that are involved. But perhaps, Robin, you want also to pick on this complexity issue here.
Yes, very much so, because there is a difference between something being complicated, and IT can be horribly complicated, but you can reduce its complexity to 0 through tests. Whereas crises, so IT incidents can be managed and can be prepared and planned for. That's why we keep telling people that proper preparation prevents poor performance. Crises cannot. They are different by nature, and they contain an element of surprise, which I'm sure you will agree, crisis management is fun. It's fun and exciting, unless you're the crisis manager and cannot escape that situation. But understanding how these two are different and must be treated differently is incredibly important. And many companies completely underestimate the challenges that come with the complexity of a crisis, where you have different actors, and we've been listening to very, very smart people, very experienced, from all walks of life, lawyers, underwriters, people who are very good at mathematics and IT and whatnot. And yet, in a proper cyber crisis, you have to align all of them and make them speak the same language, which is often very difficult. You don't end up in IT because you're good at dealing with humans. Whereas if you work in communications, you don't necessarily know a lot about IT. And that is what adds complexity to a cyber crisis. And this is why cyber crisis must be properly prepared for. Not least, coming to the second point, in order to be able to immediately respond to a critical event, an incident that is threatening to become a crisis, or a crisis proper. As you know, we've managed crises together on behalf of policyholders, supporting their crisis management teams, and speed was always of the essence, wasn't it?
That's the typical call. Somebody said already Friday 1700, and companies were saying that we're hit by an attack. We have to align the press statement with the CEO, with the manager, whatever. And at the same time, on Twitter or X or whatever, the message was already running. Obviously, they have been hit. Obviously, they are still saying it's an IT incident. Customers can't reach out. Or we had a company, a big retailer, where they declined to use the word cyber attack, and the stores outside were making paper leaflets, cashier not working due to IT incident or cyber attack. So they were totally overhauled already by the speed. But the speed means also have a reactive statement in the first 10 minutes at place to say we can confirm this, we are examining the issue. Currently, we involve these and these and this. We give an update in the next half an hour, and so on. This is good communications, and it's a little bit like the car recall industry 20 years ago, where everyone was afraid, I don't want to be in the media, I have to recall my cars due to quality issues. Here it's the same. Please, very often we hear, please try to get us out of the media. Where we say, we can't get you out of the media when you were hit. But the management of the crisis is making the tone. And if you manage the crisis properly, then you are perceived as a proper crisis manager, and not because you have a cyber attack or a problem or an issue in it. So speed, definitely Friday 1700, or we were sitting on Easter, it was the biggest Easter day. We were sitting together and having the first telco. It was not so much fun for the family, but it was exactly that, to be aware at 9 a.m. to have a place and run and communicate. On Monday after Easter, the whole crisis was over.
Many companies aren't prepared for that, and that is an issue, and we'll come to that in a second. But the ability to grab a battle document or a grab bag containing battle documents and align with your peers within the company and understand what the needs and requirements of your customers are and other third parties. Because not only are we highly regulated, an increasing number of companies and our policyholders is also regulated in whichever shape or form, whether it's data protection, data privacy laws, or whether it's other laws and legislations. And that, again, requires exercising, training, at a technical level, at a communicational level, but also on a top crisis management level, the grand strategy. How are we going to respond when, as Alex rightly said, you cannot not communicate? And some of the questions that you're forced to answer during a cyber crisis can be very, very embarrassing and very hard to respond to properly without losing face. So again, proper preparation, principle of performance. But speaking of preparation, maybe we should switch to the next slide and ask the audience.
We will immediately just highlighting the last pillar here on the slide, that is coming back to what Robin was saying. Many of the decisions in a cyber crisis are made without databases and knowledge at the beginning. So this needs, to a certain extent, a lot of experience, and therefore the team is so important. Do we know whether data has been exfiltrated? Do we know whether the threat actor is already communicating in the darknet? Do we know what will happen as the next step? No, but therefore we have to work in scenarios and plan, and we need a team and a management, because many of the decisions need to be in pace, but without the right data knowledge. Afterwards, we cannot communicate, and the crisis is over anyway. Yeah, you know, talking about polls, Germany has some big polls in the coming weekend, so therefore we also want to poll. It's the last poll for today, but we want just to get a clue from your side on three questions. So the first one is whether you have experienced, and coming back also to the introductory speech of Thomas Sepp, how many companies have been hit. So the first question is, do you know in your business environment if a company has been hit in the last 12 months, before, or was not hit? So there we want to know your view. I don't know whether we can. Poll is just running, but I can promise it's much faster than on next Sunday. Yeah, and you can see 100% was hit by a cyber attack. So you have the written confirm of the introductory words. Even more than a year ago, it was quite a time. So every year we have an increased rate of 20, 30, or even more growth in attacks, in cyber attacks. Interesting enough, here now a majority of the courts is saying was not hit, but this definitely we have to check, because as we said, you will be hit. The question is only when, and you know that in many attacks the attackers remain in the system for quite a long time before they think it's now the right moment. So definitely a good view that a lot have been already hit. The question is, do you work with partners? Yes or no? So this would be the second thing. Do you do a lot in-house? Do you have one, or do you have even more partners? So our question is here, do you work with partners, yes or no? We're just shortly asking for your patience to gather the results. Oh, that's the previous. Okay, obviously this is still like the elections. Yeah, 2/3 more or less in this current work with partners. Quite an encouraging sign. Think about only on the PR in a crisis. Someone has to sit in the crisis team. Someone has to develop the communication strategy. Someone has to write the statements. Someone has to update the website if the website is running. Someone has to do a Q&A and respond to questions. Who can do this all at once? And this is only communications. So there you definitely see quite a rush. I'd recommend that we skip, due to time reasons, the third questions and jump to our last slide, because what we want to show you is there is not a single cyber crisis itself, and everyone poses dramatically different ways how to interact. And perhaps, Robin, you can explore a little bit to these various scenarios here.
Yes, absolutely. I'd like to highlight 3 things from this slide, maybe. Number one, as you can see, we are looking at increasingly destructive cyber attacks, and therefore planning your return to normal is something that takes time and preparation and tests. Most companies don't do that. They're not properly prepared for returning to normal, and they don't even understand that when we say return to normal, we're talking about not days or weeks, but typically months that it takes to get everything back together. Number 2, the sophistication of the attackers is growing, and that includes so-called advanced persistent threat groups, so typically state-sponsored, state-condoned threat actors that will typically exceed your capability to withstand their attacks. I would therefore take this poll with a bit of caution. Have you been attacked? Maybe you haven't, maybe you have, and maybe you haven't noticed, because the dwell time of these attackers can be several months or even years, depending on how interesting a target you are and whether they actually want to be found. And therefore, as a consequence, crisis management, that is the support of your company and its top management during a critical situation, is becoming indispensable and literally critical. And that means that you must have crisis managers available. Unfortunately, those are far and few between. You will find very many, including yours, companies that are very good at crisis communication or at IT forensics, or, of course, the legal aspects of cyber attacks and cyber crises. But crisis managers, because they typically come from the world of kidnap and ransom, the good old if it flies it dies approach, that doesn't work in cyber-related scenarios. And therefore, standards exist, and the companies ought to use them. And I'm not talking about information security ISO 27000, but I'm talking about business continuity and crisis management, so ISO 223X. Tests and exercises, I've touched upon this already, but I cannot stress this enough. Proper preparation prevents poor performance. Tests and exercises are indispensable, and you should run them, bearing in mind that a one-size-fits-all approach typically doesn't fit anyone properly. And exercise they can buy off the shelf from various vendors typically do not properly take into account your company culture and your business model, and therefore the benefits to be derived from such an exercise are limited. And last, many companies rely on tabletop exercise or discussion-based exercise. Don't do that, please. It's 2023. Switch to operations-based exercise as soon as humanly possible. Someone mentioned drills. Yes, they're a very nice entry drug to operations-based crisis management exercise, but functional exercises and full-scale exercises are what we should be doing, and they should be based on crisis management plans that take fully into account the need to communicate, because cyber crises typically get a wide audience, and they should also have proper, well-defined interfaces to legal support, IT support, IT forensic support, and if and where required, crisis managers.
So you saw this vast variety of dangers, of situations where you have to act. Coming back to communication, you see a ransomware attack might be a question, should you communicate that you pay a ransom or not? A double extortion could be something where you look quite mad in the media because you were hit twice or third times, which we also experienced. The darknet is communicating by itself. So you are lost if you remain still. So only these examples show how important is what Robin was saying. Talking about intelligence, I'd like now to hand over to the last panel discussion under the lead of Joerg Ahrens. And wish you a fruitful discussion now, and thank you for your interest.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think those were really interesting findings and insights in prevention, detection and response. And I'm here with my esteemed colleagues to close the loop, to sort of wrap it up, so to say, as asking some questions as a voice of customer. So with me I have Sabrina Sexton, Head of Global Cyber SME and Mid-Corporate of the Cyber Center of Competence. I have Rishi with me, you've heard before, as Global Head of Cyber Risk Consulting, and Michael Daum as the Allianz Commercial Cyber Claims Head, and myself as Global Head of Key Case Management. And I just start off with Michael. Michael, how is Allianz Commercial Cyber Claims Intelligence created, if you create it? And how and with whom do you share these kind of insights? Can you give us a little bit of context?
Sure, Joerg. Yeah. Let's start with data collection, because that's really an important piece. And what we do and what you need to do is really to provide, first of all, a set of codes to tag all these claims. And that sounds more easy than it actually is in reality. Keep in mind, we at Allianz Commercial have roughly 70 claims handlers dealing with cyber claims in various countries, various entities. So you need to equipment with the right codes to say, for example, capture well what has been the trigger, the attack vector, to which claims position did we pay, how much, etc. So that's one step. And another very important one is you need to provide guidance to the claims handlers, because otherwise you will not get streamlined results, and then you have not the right data to analyze. So that's one. And then you go ahead with analyzing. And let me illustrate that a bit using the detection response example Rishi and I talked earlier about. We really started, when looking at our data, we started and analyzed, well, how many claims do really drive our overall losses? So, and interestingly, from all notifications we receive on claims, 3% only drive roughly 80% of the loss in euros, dollars. So that's quite remarkable, isn't it? So it seems to be a very steep curve, a very digital nature of cyber claims, so that only a few make the losses. And that led us to, just exploring a bit further in detail, well, what has been the difference in these cases? Why did some stay, what I mentioned earlier, scenario A, and why did others really go through the roof and turn into that scenario B? And once we found it in claims, we certainly started discussing here with Rishi, for example, risk engineering colleagues, with Sabrina and underwriting, and also with our Allianz Group information security. Now, Alex talked earlier, we heard then Robert talking. And what I found interesting when I spoke with them earlier this year, they really were working also on the detection topic mainly. There was good things in place already at Allianz, but they said we need to improve. So that was further confirmation, so to speak. And certainly once we are done with that internal analysis, we try to vet that with external data, like with our partners. Now we talked now today, CNC, KPMG, Glide, to make sure that what we see is also in line with what our partners see. Yeah, and in terms of communication, we first of all certainly communicate internally, but once we found something interesting, insightful, we really then go external like we do today with this conference, because we believe in order to fight back for companies, it's really important that they know how to best respond, and we think that these insights like with detection and response are really valuable to them. So that's why we want to make sure to share that as widely as possible to really enable them to fight back, so to speak.
Thank you very much. So since the clients are at the heart of our kind of striving and our centerpiece, Sabrina, I have a question for you. How can customers benefit from our claims experience and that kind of end-to-end setup we've been hearing about?
Sure. The biggest benefit for our customers is that really, if we look at Allianz, we're bringing together a global community of multilingual cyber claims experts, but also vendor partner panel experts that will really help our clients and our customers when in a claim when they need them most. This is alongside our global underwriting teams based all across the world. And our commitment to our customers is simple. It ensures consistency, and it's one strategy which is globally coordinated but locally delivered. We know that cyber risk is evolving, and our job is really to help our customers prepare, whether this be through traditional cyber products, alternative risk transfer products, risk consulting services, or multinational solutions. And it's these products based and backed by that market-leading capacity that only Allianz can offer is what we believe makes this an end-to-end very strong proposition for our customers.
Mm-hmm. And those kind of identified intelligence on trends and this in-depth knowledge of, say, those kind of targeted industry segments, do they equally benefit these insights for our clients when you have your risk dialogue with them?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely is the short answer. We will work with threat intelligence companies to be able to help us look at the qualification and the quantification of cyber risk. We also have the huge benefit of Allianz risk consulting teams in-house, which will really work with our customers on their journey to cyber resilience and being able to help them through that journey and come to an outcome where they're much stronger for it. I think the important thing to note with threat intelligence, however, is that it's very important, but no customer, no industry and no segment is immune to cyber risk. And as a result, it's really important that we work with our customers, be it the smallest SMEs or the largest companies in the world, to be able to help them through that journey for cyber risk.
You just gave me the buzzword, you know, when talking about risk consulting. If I turn to Rishi, Rishi, in that moment of truth when a claim hit, so how important is it for us to work with third-party experts to help the client? Can you sort of share a little bit of context?
Good question, yeah. It's quite important collaborating with third parties. We heard from other speakers, speed is essence when cyber incident occurs. So that's where our third parties comes into picture and help us. So beyond containment, beyond preserving forensics, data and everything, speed is essence. So to give an example, one of our insured suffered a massive DDoS attack. We brought in our third-party vendor, and they were able to deploy anti-DDoS solution. And because of that, the client came back online within no time, and that basically saved lots of losses. So that is one example. Secondly, third parties bring expert knowledge, you know, be it regulatory or compliance. Sometimes expert knowledge in terms of negotiations. In another case, one of our insured suffered a ransomware attack. We brought in our expert third party. They negotiated directly with the threat actors and significantly reduced the ransom payment. So quite useful. So these are the things, you know, when the claim occurs, if we involve third parties, they're very, very beneficial.
Well, and knowing all that and your background, I think how can Allianz, maybe you in person, help prepare the client for a claim?
Sure, good question again. So I'll start with Allianz Risk Consulting. So we are uniquely placed between our underwriting and claims function. We act as a feedback loop for our clients. So basically learning from our claims experiences, we improve our risk assessment and directly helping our client prepare for claims. We started with 10 cyber hygiene checks for every single risk. From our experience of claims, we realized we need to improve them, and now we have 12 hygiene checks, and we keep improving them, put details on them, and so on. Secondly, our claims department itself run desktop scenarios for our clients, which is quite useful because they prepare clients for claims. If incident occurs, whom to call, who your vendors are. Sometimes there are special situations like ransomware. There is a due diligence to be followed. So those type of scenarios are tested, and which is quite important to preparing for a claim. And thirdly, we also launching cyber risk services from Allianz Risk Consulting. So what we're going to do is helping our client end-to-end transparency, then focusing recommendation where it matters most. So those are different things we do to help our clients to prepare for claims. Along with that, lastly, importantly, is our third parties. They come there, they help, our expert vendor panel open for all our clients. They help with, outside in view. They provide vulnerability notifications and so on. So it's overall, we try to help our client to prepare for claims.
Sounds good. So as an outlook, given the rise of the cost of premiums, inflation, interest rates, where's insurance in all of that, in that discussion? When we ask, what is the impact on the company's ability to invest robustly in security? So what can you give us a little bit of context, Sabrina?
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. And I think as we've heard today, cyber risk continues to grow. So it's not something that's going away. In terms of where insurance lies in that conversation, it's obviously a very important part. Risk transfer is an important part, but it's not the solution to the cause. Very much insurance is part of the process and comes at the end rather than the beginning. In terms of cyber risk, it's absolutely a boardroom topic, more so now than it ever has been in the past. I think the pandemic definitely shone a light on so many companies working at pace to really digitize themselves. And as a result, we've now seen customers boosting their investments. But as we kind of move into this digital world, it's as important that intangible assets are closely monitored in the same way that tangible assets are. So when customers are now asking that question of, should I invest in my IT? Should I invest in my cyber resilience? The question more becomes, well, what will happen if I don't? What's the outcome if I don't? And really, our risk experience shows us, and a lot of this was talked about in the previous session, but organizations with better security really do perform better when there are cyber attacks, and they're definitely better equipped to deal with cyber incidents.
And if I may, as a last question, so to say, can you foresee, looking at 2023 and going forward, what is the biggest challenge and opportunity for cyber insurance and cyber risk markets in general for you?
Sure.
And why?
Sure. So what we can say for certain is digital risk isn't going to go away anytime soon. Technology, on the plus side, continues to develop. The technology we have as insurers gets better and better. The technology our customers invest in gets better and better, but then also does the technology that threat actors also have access to, so there becomes a challenge. If we look into 2023, 24 and beyond, I think we can probably say for certain that the demand for cyber risk transfer solutions won't go away. Certainly as customers become more aware of cyber risk and what cyber attacks might mean for their business. And I guess looking to the future, really, insurers have a really important part to play in more proactive risk services for clients. So as insurers, whether that be for us sharing threat intelligence, claims data, utilizing innovative technology to be able to hold the hands of our customers and really support them on their journey, or even just added value services to policyholders, particularly in the SME and mid-corporate segment where they may not have those resources, is going to be something really important. And I think it's with these initiatives that as insurers, we're going to be able to continue to support the smallest SMEs, but also the largest companies in the world to help improve their cyber risk.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, so thank you very much for that, for the interesting insights, for the wonderful wrap-up. I can say now for sure we are ready, not only to listen, but also be with our clients when it counts. So with that, I hand over to Michael for closing remarks.
Yeah, thanks, Joerg, Rishi, thanks, Sabrina. Thanks to all of our speakers. Yeah, it has been really great content, great insights you shared. So thank you so much, all. We also would like to thank you, our audience, for staying with us for almost the 2 hours. We apologize for any inconvenience caused by the technical problems. If you have any further comments, questions, you would like to reach out to us, the contact details are displayed here. And with that, I would like to close today's conference. Thank you again, and have a great day. Bye-bye.